Welcome to the Craftsman Online Podcast, the only 5-star rated Masonic podcast endorsed by the Grand Lodge of New York. Any opinions, thoughts, or viewpoints shared during this program are that of the individual and do not reflect the official position of any Grand Lodge, appendant, or concordant body from which that member may hail. I'm your host, Brother Michael Arce, co-founder of CraftsmanOnline.com. You've joined us for our episode on the history of Finnish Freemasonry, where since the late 18th century, Freemasonry in Finland has faced challenges and suppression. We're lucky to have Right Worshipful Lauri Helaniemi as our special guest this week as we travel through time to discuss the unique bond that Finnish Freemasons share with our brethren of the Grand Lodge of New York, and of course their upcoming events. Let me just make sure I got this right, because I'm sure you're going to be able to pronounce it better than me. Brother, how do we say your name correctly in Finnish?
Well, hello, Michael, and hello, brethren all. Finnish is an easy language. You just say every letter. They only have one sound. So my name is said Lauri Helaniemi, but you can just call me Larry.
Brother Larry, I love that. Very good. We're also honored to have you on with your title as a Right Worshipful Past Assistant Grand Master. Can you tell us a little bit about your Masonic story and what led you to knock on the door of a lodge?
Well, sure. I'd be happy to, Michael. Well, first of all, thank you for pointing me out as the furthest away brother so far on the podcast. I certainly hope that will change in time. But coming from Santa Claus land, Father Christmas comes from Finland, as you well know. The distance doesn't matter at all, because he travels everywhere all the time at the speed of light. So it's not a big deal for us Finns to travel. Masonically, I'm a Lewis, meaning a second generation Mason after my father. And thus I became a Mason rather young, having just turned 30. Now I enjoy already having been a Mason for over 35 years. I've had the privilege of being the member of the founding lodge, Suomi Lodge number 1. And while we do take care of our history legacy seriously, we are also the biggest lodge in Finland. So it was quite natural for me to knock on the door.
Let's talk about this history, because I am always blown away with how integral the Grand Lodge of New York is when it comes to establishing Grand Lodge or just spreading the light in Freemasonry around the world. We know the origins of Freemasonry date back to 1756 in the lands of Finland. They were part of the Kingdom of Sweden, and the Grand Lodge of Sweden had a few Swedish lodges in their eastern territories. I think one of the earliest challenges, honestly, to the craft probably came from the Tsar Alexander I, who issued a decree against all secret organizations within the Russian Empire. What has been the historical perception of Freemasonry in Finland? And has that changed over the years?
Well, you've done your history study as well, Michael. That's absolutely correct. So you can basically divide the Freemasonry in the region of Finland into two eras. One is the time before the Russian time, and one is then the time after. So during the time we were part of Swedish kingdom, so there was no Finland at that time yet. There was Freemasonry in Sweden in all the parts of the country. But of course, we were a poor peasant country. We were the farmers in the east, and so the kingdoms, the royalties, Masonic hobbies didn't really affect that much the Finnish normal person. And then again, the Russian time, which was a good time for Finnish independence thinking and development per se. The Tsar himself was a bit afraid, like many of that time's rulers, a bit afraid of the effects of Freemasonry in his realm. So Freemasonry was totally forbidden. So actually, during all of the time that we were part of Russia for 100 years, there was no Freemasonry in Finland. So Finland was a blank spot, basically, beginning of the 1900s, when then it started to evolve.
What led to that change over time? Was it just the lack of Russian involvement, changes, like I guess in the political climate, or did the people start seeking it?
No, it actually started directly from the U.S. in the sense that since the oppression was quite hard in the beginning of the 1900s, economy was horrible in Europe. There were wars ongoing, and the Tsar was, of course, implementing a draft of the young men. So 300,000 Finns moved out of Finland at that time, all over the world. And many ended up in the US, in the free land, as it was called then. And being in the States, they, of course, were affected by Freemasonic thinking and became Masons. So when we then became independent in 1917 and they returned as repatriates back to Finland and started to rebuild the country, of course, they were, many of them, Masons, and they thought that, well, we have to have Freemasonry in Finland as well. And that's how it started to be built.
I always think of Finland as an older country, but relatively speaking, it's kind of quote unquote new. It's really only been around for just over 100 years as its own nation, so to speak.
That's correct. Yeah. However, as a population, we've been there forever.
Correct. You do have that going for you. And that's kind of where the connection, I guess, begins with the Grand Lodge of Finland and the Grand Lodge of New York, where you said 1917 is when the country of Finland was established. But in 1921, Most Worshipful Arthur Tompkins of the Grand Lodge of New York accepted the petition of Finnish Masons to establish the first lodge in now what we refer to as the newly formed Republic of Finland. Why is it so significant that Finnish Freemasons chose to be independent of other European countries and adopt the practice of Freemasonry from America, especially the Grand Lodge of New York versus England or France, which would have been closer and just probably more prominent at that time?
Yeah, and not to speak about Sweden, of course, which was a kingdom right next door and had a strong Masonic heraldry already. But I think it all goes back to the seeking of independence. Starting from the 1850s all the way on to the early 1900s, when independence thinking was growing in Finland, with a lot of innovations coming up. I would imagine that this same population, who then finally gradually got their independence after 50 years, did not feel comfortable with getting the free thought thinking of Freemasons from either a kingdom led where the Masonic world would be led by a king, or any other older cultures, but rather would want to do it their own way, as we Finns always do, and then bringing the fresh thinking and fresh thoughts of Washington and Jefferson across the pond from the culture they'd been accustomed to for the 20 years they were expats in the States. It feels very logical now that you think about it. It would have been not a wise choice to take it from somewhere where it had other types of roots.
Right. And here's the part where I feel embarrassed admitting this, that I did not know of this unique bond, this historical connection between our two jurisdictions until recently, when the Deputy Grand Master, the publisher of Craftsman Online, Right Worshipful Stephen Adam Rubin, pointed this out. And I was like, wow, this is just another, I think for a lot of brothers in New York, a Masonic gem that we can go and be proud of having that connection. How well is it known in Finland, the New York Finnish connection?
I have to say it's as we say in Finnish, it's in our mother's milk. So we do know our history very well, and we are very, very proud of being one of the few Masonic bodies doing the web ritual, for instance, on the European side. So we are very conscious of it and very proud of it, and we've been visiting our mother Grand Lodge, meaning Grand Lodge of New York, regularly every now and then, and you have also remembered us on our birthdays every now and then. But I have now noticed, having traveled to your great Grand Lodge a few times, that there is not a lot of knowledge of this. And we are actually your only fully accepted daughter in the world. And actually the first one, of course. And you have now also a granddaughter, since the Grand Lodge of Finland has given birth to the Grand Lodge of Estonia,
Hmm.
and they are also doing the web ritual in Estonia. So you have a big family already, which started in 1922 with the wise thinking of Most Worshipful Tompkins.
It's always a highlight for me being able to travel in the jurisdictions here in the US and visiting our other states and seeing how the ritual is practiced. How different is the New York ritual that you know, that I would know, as both tied to the Grand Lodge of New York, compared to if you went to Sweden or European countries?
Masonry is quite a diverse way of thinking and educating young men. And actually, there are quite a lot of different rituals being used. So I would like to point out, for instance, the special situation we have in Finland, where the neighboring countries on our western side are all Nordic countries, and they speak the Swedish language, and they have the Swedish rite. So that is a 10 degree system, totally different to the web ritual you and I know by heart. So there is only the theory is the same. The actual ritual is totally different. Now that is, of course, both a richness, but also a sort of a mishap. So it depends on which way you look at the coin. Is it half full or half empty? But since we have the Swedish rite also being executed in the Finnish region, so we have the richness of being able to visit also these different types of rituals.
To me, it just brings such a smile to my face that you have such pride to be practicing the web ritual. And it's one of the things that I find so special, is because there is that immediate New York connection with him and the influence that he had, not only in Blue Lodge, but also in the York Rite. Is that also something that is practiced in Finland?
Oh, yes. We have quite an amount of those appending bodies also present in Finland as well. So yes, but also the Scottish Rite is very largely appreciated in Finland. We're only a population of 5.5 million people all in all, but we're lucky to have quite a full-bodied Masonic brotherhood. So we have 7,300 members and nearly 200 lodges in 40 different cities around the country. So quite widely spread, but they are all mostly the web ritual, and we do it in 4 languages, which is quite extraordinary as well: Finnish, Swedish, English, and German.
Okay, so there's a chance that if I was able to travel out there, which would be amazing, I might be able to keep up with what's going on, being somewhat familiar with it here in New York.
I promise you will.
Last summer, a delegation, as you mentioned, from the Grand Lodge of New York traveled to Helsinki to attend many events that celebrated the 100th anniversary of your lodge, which was the first lodge in Finland. Can you tell me some of the history, some of the unique history of your lodge and what makes it so special, besides just being the first lodge in Finland?
Yeah, well, there's a lot to carry already there for sure. But of course, it was a special occasion in 1922. I mean, Most Worshipful Tompkins. I mean, it was not an easy decision for him to say and go across the Atlantic on the other side and put up a new lodge somewhere. And as we all know, I mean, you need 3 lodges in minimum to be able to put up a Grand Lodge. So he had to come back also the next year and put up 2 more lodges. So Tammer 2 and Phoenix 3 were also put up before he could then come in 24 and put up the Grand Lodge. So in fact, I'm very proud that my lodge mother or is a descendant of a Grand Lodge directly instead of another lodge, which is the case normally. So Grand Lodge of New York is my mother lodge.
It's interesting, too, because we share that here in New York. We refer to our colonial lodges, which would be the single digit lodges, where you step back and say, oh, well, I was a member of a lodge that was warranted or chartered in 1774. And Americans would be like, wow, that was before we were even a country. They were practicing Freemasonry here. And that's a really unique thing that I would say in the Northeast, where we have some of the states there from the early settlers and down on the East Coast. But it's neat to see that in Finland, you have that affinity for the lower numbered lodges as well, and also respect the legacy of them.
That's right, yes. In the Grand Lodge of England, which is then the grandmother lodge of all of our lodges, they call them the immemorial lodges, and they have the same system of the first 4 lodges that are still there, having been there before the Grand Lodge was there.
Right.
Well, what is of course special of my lodge is the number 1 lodge is that we then got to pick the block first, and of course many of our members in the beginning were quite big dignitaries in all fields of Finnish life, both political and cultural as well. So, for instance, the world famous composer Jean Sibelius is a member of my lodge.
And the neat thing is that being 100 years old, you only really are about 5 generations. So there is that lineage to where men could point, like yourself as Lewis's, and say, well, my family has had 4 generations, or if they're lucky, 5 generations of men who have been members of this lodge. Are you one of the oldest that can trace back through the generations, or are there others that have a little bit deeper?
Well, a lot of families, like you said, do have this already. I only have 2 generations, so my father and myself, but I do know of 4 generations in Finland as well. But they are not very common, of course. They are quite special.
That's super special. That's amazing. So let's talk about the event that had happened in 2022 last summer. It was a huge week. What were some of the highlights that you can share with us and our listeners, especially as and I hope I'm saying this correctly, the Centenary program director and as a Finnish Mason?
Yes, it was, of course, for me personally a big deal, because this started off the Centenary Jubilee. And we are having this for 3 years, and that is, of course, back to what we were just talking, that you need the 3 lodges. So in fact, we started with the centenary of the lodge number 1 last year, and now we're having the centenary of the 2nd and 3rd lodge this year, and then the centenary of the Grand Lodge, which these 3 lodges then gave birth to in 24. Well, last year was a memorable year, as it was both, of course, the big jubilee of my lodge. I was proud to be a part of that feasting. However, I luckily was there only as a guest. But at the same time, then it was the beginning of the whole Jubilee sequence of events, and we had rented the music hall of Helsinki, and we had a Masonic concert with music only composed by Masons around the world throughout the hundreds of years, and we were over 1,000 people just listening to Masonic music, and that was absolutely marvelous.
I remember Brother Steve was telling us about the dinner that you had mentioned that he attended, and he got a chance to get up and say some words. And I love when he talks, because he really does speak from the heart. But one of the things that he was impressed about was the concert that you mentioned, but also just being outside with the air and the Finnish people. And, it's just one of those things that's unfortunate that in America, we don't think of that part of the world, and unless it's Christmas time. But he was really taken back by like the beautiful architecture and just the cleanliness and the beauty that exists in your country.
That's right. We are so blessed by being up in the north, where the climate is absolutely marvelous. It's one of the cleanest countries in the world, of course. We have 100,000 lakes where we then can spend our time. The fun thing is that you can hop off your sailing boat and swim in sweet water and take coffee water from it and drink coffee as well. So it's all in one package. But you're right, the Jubileum week had a lot of events. So some of the brethren were sailing. There were about 120 brethren with their spouses sailing around, having lunch on board ships. There were some doing, of course, Masonic educational work. There were some concerts as well during the day. So it was a big family day and big event with thousands of people walking around and getting to know the Masons.
All I'm thinking is I have not yet gotten to sit in the East. You were very close in the Grand East as the assistant past assistant Grand Master. What was it like planning or pulling together this event? This has to be like the big one, that 100th anniversary.
It certainly is, yes. I'm very blessed. I've been a Grand Officer for 13 years. I was Grand Chancellor for 9 years, and then Grand Secretary for 4 years, and now I've been known. I know the system so well that it's a wonderful challenge and opportunity for me to put this centenary together. But it does it does need an effort, and I'm lucky that all the brethren who I've contacted and asked them to join the team have very gladly done so. So we are over 100 volunteers at the moment already, just in the planning phase, and once we get into the execution phase, we'll be 100 more. So yes, it's a big project, and it's all done, of course, voluntarily, and I'm so happy that all the brethren are standing up.
Now, by the time this podcast airs, our brothers who are listening, if they were at the 2023 Grand Lodge of New York session in May, heard that next year a delegation of New York Masons will again travel to Finland to commemorate, as you mentioned, the 100-year anniversary of the Grand Lodge of Finland. Can you share with our listener how important and how special that event is going to be when it comes to our two jurisdictions coming together?
Well, that is, of course, then the absolute highlight of the whole centenary 3-year jubilee time. Centenary week will be the first week of September. That is the actual week also when the Grand Lodge was then consecrated 100 years ago. And it will have numerous different events ongoing. And we will, of course, be hosting guests from all over Europe. But we are focusing a lot on our brethren from New York, because you are our real cousins, if you can call it that, or even brethren, of course. But I mean a bit more than just a normal brethren. So we are looking at a wholesome 1 week's program, but you can pick what you want and do what you feel like. So the main event, of course, is the centenary communication. So we will be having, for instance, a reenactment of Tompkins doing the consecration of the Grand Lodge 100 years ago. Not, of course, not the ritual, but the thinking behind. So we've done an extensive history study with the University of Helsinki stepping in as well. And we will be publishing a history book of Masonry in Finland. And that will be then widely presented also to the open public. So we are hoping to engage also the open public to join in our festivities and to learn about Freemasonry, and also to maybe get new members through that.
Will there be another concert?
Well, there will be actually a lot of music, yes. We will be having the world premiere of the Widow's Sons Masonic Opera. That will be presented in a church. So that will be an absolute highlight. And as I already pointed out earlier, composer master Jean Sibelius composed ritual music for the web ritual, and that is composed into the ritual itself. So it is an integral part of the ritual, and that will be presented to the audience in different ways, with both singing and organ playing and a bit of history telling as well. So there will be an option to listen to that music as well, and not to say the actual annual communication and the gala dinner after that with a lot of jazz and so on. So a lot of music, for sure.
That sounds like a good time. I wish I could be there, and I know that that is not going to be a possibility for me next summer. Will there be opportunities for some of this to be virtual for Masons to attend, or will there be recordings available, especially the musical performance? I think that opera sounds fantastic.
How much of this will be online during the events and how much will be afterwards, that has not yet been decided. There's a bit of a difference of technology, and I think we will rather do it afterwards. But I'm hoping that we will have a lot of it online as well, to get the highlights out there as well. Do you remember where Finland is? I mean, a lot of people talk very fluently of Finland, and then when you ask, well, where is it? And then they say, well, somewhere in Europe, and that's correct, of course. And of course, it's up in the north, and I'm not going to go do a test on you where it is more than that. But it is between Sweden and Finland, and we have a waterway between us. So the Grand Lodges of Sweden and Estonia will be supporting us also, in the sense that there will be a possibility for those visiting us to also do a quick stopover in Estonia and go and look at the Freemasons Hall in Estonia, or then to Sweden, an overnight cruise to Stockholm and get to look at that. So actually, when I've heard your countrymen traveling here in Europe, you do this tick in the box type of traveling, and you will now get 3 ticks on the price of 1. So you'll also get to see Estonia and Stockholm and Sweden as well.
It's a big deal for us because the idea, at least where we are here, and I know you've visited over here, but traveling even on our continent and visiting our neighbor countries, that takes some time. And it's one of the neat things in Europe where it would be like traveling over to another state for us, but it's not. It's a whole other, nation or republic of people. I'm hoping for the best for this event next year. I think it's going to be fantastic. I know you and your team are going to work and put together a successful event. So best of luck and enjoy it. And please, pictures, videos, whatever you can share with the rest of us. We'd like to join in the celebration.
Thank you very much, Michael. And this was a privilege for me to tell about it. And I hope that those of you listeners who actually got a bit enthusiastic about it, please contact your Grand Secretary. He has all the information. And I will be doing a writing in your next Masonic magazine as well. So you'll catch some information from there. We're hoping to get pre-registrations already in this year. So I'm looking forward to seeing as many of New York Masons in visiting in Finland and taking part in your daughter's birthday.
Before we let you go, at the end of the podcast, I always end with the phrase, let peace and harmony prevail. What I'd like to do is I'll close this episode out. If you could say that line in Finnish, that would be fantastic. Sound good?
That sounds good.
This has been the Craftsman Online podcast. Again, we want to thank our guest for joining us this week. It was so nice when he just said Brother Larry, but I'm going to try. Brother Lauri Helaniemi, right?
It's good. Thank you very much.
If you've enjoyed this episode and you want to hear more, you can tell Siri or Alexa to play the Craftsman Online podcast. We are available on all streaming platforms with new episodes every Monday morning. Until next time, let peace and harmony prevail.
Vallitkoon turvallisuus ja rauha maailmassa. Thank you all.